Bereshit, or Genesis 38 through 40. And at that time it came to be that Yehuda left his brothers and turned aside to a man, an Adulamite, whose name was Hira. And Yehuda saw there a daughter of a certain Cananite, whose name was Shuwa. And he took her and went into her. And she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Kezib when she bore him. And Yehuda took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Yehuda's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of Yehovah, and Yehovah took his life. And Yehuda said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother." And Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, and it came to be when he went into his brother's wife that he spilled on the ground, lest he should give an offspring to his brother. But what he did displeased Yehovah, so he took his life too. Then Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah is grown." For he said, "Lest he also die, as his brothers did." And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And after a long time, the daughter of Shuwa, Yehuda's wife, died. And Yehuda was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. And it was reported to Tamar, "See, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." And she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat at the entrance to Enayim, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw Shelah was not grown, and she wasn't going to be given to him as a wife. And Yehuda saw her, and reckoned her for a whore, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What do you give me to come into me?" And he said, "Let me send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "Do you give me a pledge until you send it?" So he said, "What pledge should I give you?" And she said, "Your seal and your cord and your staff that's in your hand." And he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. And she rose and went away and removed her veil and put on the garments of widowhood. And Yehuda sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hands, but he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, "Where is the cult prostitute who was beside the way to Enayim?" And they said, "There's no cult prostitute in this place." And he returned to Yehuda and said, "I have not found her." And the men of the place also said, "There was no cult prostitute in this place." And Yehuda said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we become despised. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her." And it came to be about 3 moons after that Yehuda was informed, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law has whored, and see, she is conceived by whoring." And Yehuda said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." And when she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong am I pregnant." And she said, "Please examine who these are, the seal, and the cord, and the staff." And Yehuda examined them and said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he never knew her again. And it came to be at the time for giving birth that, see, twins were in her womb. And it came to be when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." And it came to be as he drew back his hand that his brother came out. And she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." So his name was called Peretz. And afterwards his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand. So his name was called Zerah. Genesis 39. And Yoseph had been taken down to Mitsrayim, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a Mitzrayite, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And it came to be that Yehovah was with Yoseph, and he became a prosperous man, and was in the house of his master the Mitzrayite. And his master saw that Yehovah was with him, and that Yehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Yoseph found favor in his eyes and served him, and he appointed him over all his house, and gave into his hand all that he had. And it came to be from time to time that he had appointed him over his house, and all that he had, that Yehovah had blessed the Mitzrayite's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Yehovah was on all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left in Joseph's hand all that he had, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And Yoseph was handsome in form and handsome in appearance. And after these events it came to be that his master's wife lifted up her eyes to Yoseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has given into my hand all that he has. No one's greater in this house than I, and he has not withheld whatever from me but you, because you're his wife. And how shall I do this great evil and sin against Elohim?" And it came to be, as she spoke to Yoseph day by day, that he did not listen to her, to lie with her, to be with her. And it came to be on a certain day, when Yoseph went into the house to do his work, none of the men of the house were inside. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And it came to be, when she saw he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called the men of the house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he's brought this Hebrew to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. And it came to be, when he heard I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside." And she kept his garment with her until his master came home. And she spoke to him, saying these words, "The Hebrew servant who you brought to us came in to me to mock me. And so it came to be, as I lifted out my voice and I cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. And it came to be, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, 'Your servant did to me according to these words,' that his displeasure burned. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the sovereign's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. But Yehovah was with Yoseph and extended loving commitment to him, and he gave him favor in eyes of the prison warden. And the prison warden gave into the hand of Yoseph all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there was his doing. The prison warden did not look into any point that which was under Joseph's hand, because Yehovah was with him, and whatever Yoseph did, Yehovah made prosper. Genesis chapter 40. And after these events, it came to be that the cupbearer and the baker of the sovereign of Mitsrayim sinned against their master and the sovereign of Mitsrayim. And Pharaoh was wroth with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Yoseph was a prisoner. And the captain of the guard put Yoseph in charge of them, and he served them. So they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker of the sovereign of Mitsrayim, who were confined in the prison, dreamed a dream, both of them. Each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Yoseph came to them in the morning and looked at them and saw they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in confinement of his master's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said to him, "We each have dreamed a dream, and there's no one to interpret it." And Yoseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to Elohim? Relate them to me, please." So the chief cupbearer related his dream to Yoseph and said to him, "See, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. And it was though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Yoseph said to him," this is the interpretation of it, "the 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you shall put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, according to the former ruling when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it's well with you, and please show loving commitment to me, and mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For truly, I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done naught that they should put me into the dungeon." And the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, and said to Yoseph, "I also was in my dream and saw 3 white baskets on my head. The uppermost basket, all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." And Yoseph answered and said, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days, yet within 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds shall eat your flesh from you. And on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, it came to be that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief cupbearer to the post of cupbearer again. And he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker just as Yoseph had interpreted to them. And the chief cupbearer did not remember Yoseph, but forgot him.